You stabbed me in the back.
What?
You set the whole thing up.
Rick, come on, I defended you. Is that real?
You pretended to be my friend. You made me do this.
Even after all this time, this scene is still one of the most impactful. But why is that exactly? Why is it this that leaves the most emotional impact to me? I guess we should discuss the Rick in the room. A lot of shows did school shooting episodes or lockdowns, but this just feels much more organic than those moments. I think it's because the bullying of Rick feels like it naturally developed, so this moment hits harder. Rick was introduced as a boyfriend for Terry, a character from seasons 1 to 3. He starts off as a secret admirer, sending Terry roses. They start dating until he starts becoming abusive towards her. It first starts off with gripping her wrist too hard and saying things that shake her confidence.
I just don't want you to embarrass yourself in front of all those people. It could be so humiliating for you.
Then it leads to him slapping her.
Rick, you're being crazy.
Don't ever call me that. Ever.
And throwing her against a wall.
I need to go. I need to think.
About what? Leaving me?
I don't want to, Rick. It's just that you're suffocating me.
She finally calls it off with Rick, and for the time being, Terry steers clear of him until sometime later when Paige invites them all out so they can spend a Saturday at the park, and Terry is reluctant because she doesn't have someone like her other friends, so she'd naturally feel like a fifth wheel. In drama class, she and Rick get paired up, and this is where Rick weasels his way back in, like this scene with the trust fall and how he uses his charisma to make Terry feel safe after he catches her.
That wasn't so bad, was it?
Or how he looks at her like she's insane for not trusting that he'd catch her.
Do you honestly think I'm gonna drop you? Because I'm not. Just trust me.
They start to have a friendly conversation, and Terry invites him to go with them on Saturday. The rest of the group hates this idea. Spinner then says how they should bring him along because they don't want to leave Terry alone with Rick because she'll choose to stay behind with him instead of going with them, which makes sense. I think the show does a good job showing Rick's growing control over Terry.
So how long have you known Jimmy? Good friend?
Sure, I like him. But not like that. I should check with Rick first.
I understand what girls' night means, Terry. I just don't see why you need one. So I can't come? So you can pick up guys?
No.
Is it so you can talk about me? Then why can't I come? Explain it to me, because it doesn't make sense.
I need to be alone. Me and Hazel had a fight.
Well, one, I'm not surprised. Two, let's make a rule. You see Hazel and Paige in school, only.
And the way he tries to win her back after he's messed up multiple times.
I was jealous of Jimmy. He has a thing for you. Why else did he cast you in the lead?
We're friends.
You're beautiful and smart and sweet, talented. Can you blame me for thinking every guy loves you like I do?
The actor really gives a good performance on selling you on this kid with anger and control issues. He constantly feels inferior next to Terry when she brings up Jimmy. He tries to control who she can hang out with and when. He's manipulative and unpredictable, which makes you feel for Terry in this situation. It also makes it more believable in its entirety. Terry is also depicted as insecure about her weight, and this insecurity shakes her confidence when it comes to boys. So guys like Rick can easily take advantage of that, like when Rick tells Terry to get a salad instead of what she wants to get.
I don't know, what about a burger?
Why not a salad? You said yesterday you're craving one.
What kind should I order?
Go for garden. Light dressing. Healthiest choice in the menu.
Rick is unstable, he's arrogant, socially awkward, socially inept at points, and his need to control things makes sense to why it eventually leads him to make the decisions he does. We'll get to that. So everything seems to be great with Terry and Rick until he overhears Paige talking to her.
He apologized.
Of course, this type always does, so they can get another shot in at you.
One, you have no right to dictate who Terry's friends are. And two, you're a vicious backstabber.
Oh, I'm vicious?
Everything you say is a judgment. You think you're so perfect.
What?
And this clearly gets him upset. He runs off into a secluded part of the park, kicking things around in anger, and Paige encourages Terry to go after her. This eventually leads to Paige's guilt about what happens. Terry seems to calm Rick down, and honestly, this reaction from Rick makes me kind of terrified.
Sorry about Paige.
It does not matter. She does not matter.
Calm down.
I'm sorry. I'm just so happy.
Come back. We'll ignore Paige.
No, let's walk. She called me the psycho.
That's just Paige being Paige.
That makes it okay? My feelings mean nothing to you?
Rick,
Don't dare choose Paige over me again. Don't you dare.
I'm going back.
You can't leave. Do you understand?
Rick, you're hurting me.
You're not going. You're not. Not.
Paige and Spinner come to check on Terry after a while that she's been gone, and they find Rick hunched over by Terry with blood all over his hands. He runs once he sees them, and from this point on, Terry is put into a coma. Rick gets expelled from Degrassi, and everyone is struggling to kind of come to terms with what Rick has done, because Terry also now needs to have surgery because there's clotting in her brain, and there's just been a lot of damage. The father gets angry because no one told him about the abuse that was going on, and it's just a really honestly emotional second half of the episode. We don't really see much of Rick after this because we're mostly getting the perspective of her friends, but we do see him in the car waiting for his mother when Spinner catches him and pulls him out and nearly punches him out until Paige stops him. His mother comes out defending him, and I swear I wanted to slap this woman.
Let him go! You stay away from my son. Both of you!
I assume that there were no legal repercussions because the show doesn't really state if there was or not. And if there was, he probably got like community service or something if there were any legal repercussions, even though it's pretty serious because she could have fucking died. In season 4, episode 4, Rick comes back after 5 months away, and obviously nobody wants him to be there. It was probably a bad idea for Rick to come back to the school at all, where everyone knows that he put Terry into a coma. He says that he's been to therapy, but no one's buying it, especially Emma. She really wants to fit in with the cool older kids this season, and she's doing anything to impress them. Emma and Paige start a protest for people against violence, trying to get Rick kicked out, and this is where the bullying and harassment starts, and it's really instigated by Emma and her need to protest Rick being at Degrassi. People start bullying Rick because they think it's okay to abuse the abuser. Using more violence against someone who was violent obviously doesn't solve anything. And I understand why the main group is mad at Rick. I'm not trying to give a pass to him. Just because I sympathize with a character doesn't mean that I like the choices that they made or even like the character himself. I do think that Rick is somebody that deserves to be redeemed and also could have been redeemed if people gave him an actual chance. But considering the circumstances of what he did, I don't blame people for just thinking that he's someone that can't be redeemed. It's a really kind of hard situation depending on whose perspective you're looking at it from, because if you're looking at it from Rick's perspective, it's still pretty depressing even when you think about the stuff that he's done in the past. To do this to another human being and treat them like this is just really hard to watch, and honestly it ends up making things worse in the long run. I know we'll get there. When Rick stands up in front of the class and starts reading a quote, Spinner does this.
Coward.
Calvin, principal's office now. Now.
I honestly feel really bad for this kid. Even though I understand from an outsider's perspective, Rick is someone that doesn't deserve sympathy. I think that we as humans forget that we are all multifaceted beings with complexities, and because we strip people down to the shallow parts that we see on the surface, we kind of forget that people are people with feelings, and the things that we do and say have an impact, even if you think that person is a piece of shit. That's why when you see or hear someone say that just smiling or waving at somebody can have an impact on them, it really does make a difference. Honestly, I think Degrassi treads that fine line with Rick, making him just sympathetic enough as a human with flaws that made mistakes and is reaching out for forgiveness, but no one believes him or wants anything to do with him. So Rick basically bribes Emma with a $500 check towards their cause in order for the bullying to stop, but she doesn't take the check. Alex overhears this and snatches the check away. Rick tries to explain himself calmly, but Alex doesn't want to hear it, and he walks away. Alex's response to the situation makes total sense, considering the fact that she comes from a background with a parent that has been abused. Later at the dot, Rick greets Emma, and Alex makes a comment about Rick and Emma being a couple. Paige gets defensive, and then in order for Emma to prove herself, she trips Rick in front of everyone. Rick, who looks angry, he just got tripped and publicly humiliated in front of everyone, but Jay takes this upon himself to drag Rick outside and start a fight with everyone. Even though Jay has nothing to do with this, he has nothing better to do than insert himself in more violence, and you can see how Emma feels guilty for what she did and decides to stand up for Rick, losing her in with the older kids group. The next day, Rick approaches Emma and she makes a comment about his new frames. He then thanks her for the day before. She immediately tells him that it wasn't because she liked him or anything. She asks Rick why he even came back to Degrassi, and he explains in a really sad way.
I like it at Degrassi. Well, I used to. That was horrible. But I've changed. All those people who hate me, I want to let them see who I really am. Show them how wrong they are.
They're not interested, Rick.
They will be. Someday.
The expressions on his face, you feel the desperation to prove himself to the others around him, but everyone sees him as a punching bag or someone to just ignore altogether. It's incredibly sad. The response that Rick gives to Emma after she says that they don't want anything to do with him is equally haunting, knowing what we know in hindsight, as it is sad. In the next episode that we see Rick, he's walking into class when all of the students are asked to pair up. Rick notices that Toby doesn't have a partner and asks if he wants to pair up. This leads to a bet made between the two to see who can get more kisses from girls. It starts with Emma and she gives both of them a kiss on the cheek, making it a tie. It's sad because we can see how happy Rick is to have finally found a friend in Toby, and this competition just seems like something at least fun compared to what he's been going through the entire time that he's come back to Degrassi. As the episode continues, we see that Toby has no problem getting kisses, but Rick can't even get one girl to kiss him, and it's hard to watch, honestly.
Decent looking, I'll give $5 or something. I don't.
Toby starts to see how hard of a time Rick is having, and he decides to pay a girl $5 to kiss him. I think this is also the first time we see Darcy, so that's interesting. I think this episode gives a bittersweet feeling because we still see how Rick is tormented even when he finally found a friend. Also, watching in hindsight makes it worse because we know how all of this ends, so it makes you feel for Toby and Rick much more. In the next episode, we see Rick walking in the Degrassi parking lot when Jimmy and Spinner come take his hat and throw him into a dumpster. We clearly see how the bullying has gotten worse for Rick, and the look on his face just tells us that he's literally about to snap. In an attempt to get revenge, Rick spray paints an X on Spinner's car window. He later goes to Mr. Radich and tells him how he's getting bullied, but his cries for help are ignored.
Do I look like I have time for a chat, Richard? Your point?
He's harassing me, sir. Well, he doesn't like me and he has no qualms expressing it.
So are you asking me to order this student to like you? Do you really think that will resolve matters? Richard, I've told you time and time again, it takes two to tango.
Sir.
You don't like him and he doesn't like you. I suggest you try harder to get along. Come back if anything serious happens.
Which again feels realistic since he already sees Rick as a troublemaker as it is, and he really doesn't value the individual issues of each student since he's a principal that has to watch over all of the students and make sure that there isn't any trouble for the school. And it's just sad that really there aren't great responses when it comes to the school system to kids getting bullied. And it's sad that this is probably the response that a lot of kids get when being bullied in school. Most of the time, schools can't really do much other than suspension, and that doesn't really help the bullying. Schools also don't respond unless they have something really serious they're dealing with, which is usually if the kid is basically on the brink of suicide or if they've already gotten injured enough to be noticed. A lot of the time, these responses are in hindsight as well, after something really bad has happened.
They want to know if you can get into Rick's email to look for signs, warning signs.
Now the groundbreaking 2020 hindsight policy kicks into gear.
I have 700 students and a teaching staff that I'm responsible for every day. Don't get on my case because one kid overreacted to some spilled paint.
Yeah, one kid who you've personally spoken to twice in the last 2 days. But did you listen?
Of course I did.
I bet you can't remember a word he said. This tragedy, Dana, could have been prevented if you hadn't...
It's usually never preventative measures. I went to a middle school and a kid got bullied so bad that nearly every kid in my class got suspended. I didn't even know the bullying had gotten to a point where the kid had stopped showing up until all of it was already happening. I was literally told that I was one of the only kids that was nice to him. And a lot of these kids avoid situations like this. It's better to just ignore it than to either give a bad or positive response. And I think that's how a lot of kids deal with bullying, because they don't want to be seen as the one that's, hanging out with the loser kid. So they'll just ignore the kid and not really do anything either. And I always felt bad that I didn't try harder to be that kid's friend or stand up to the kids that made fun of him. I regret even laughing at certain points when they'd make fun of a lisp that he had, and it's just really sad. Kids can be very mean, which can lead to severe bullying and even school shootings. So after his talk with Mr. Radich, Rick bumps into Jimmy, who of course has something snarky to say. Then Rick responds back in defense, and just as they are about to get into a fight, Mr. Simpson catches them and then quizzes Jimmy to test to see if he's a good contestant for the quiz show that's happening at Degrassi. After that, Jay assaults Toby, looking for Rick. Toby goes to the gym to meet with the rest of the group, and they notice what happened to him. His lip is bleeding.
Wish you hit him, Jimmy. Miss out on all the fun.
Look, Rick, why don't you just back off?
I've been suffering for weeks. It's a big joke to you and your friends. I should just stop it. Toby doesn't deserve this. Nobody does.
This is where Jimmy realizes what he's doing isn't right, and after practice, it seems like Jimmy and Rick are on a little bit better of talking terms. Jay, Spinner, and Alex walk up to try to instigate a fight with Rick. Jimmy defends him, and then Rick gets a little cocky at his seemingly new friendship with Jimmy, and this only fuels the flames. On the day of the quiz show, Toby goes to pick up Rick, and this scene is really sad. The way he inflated the one kind gesture he got from Jimmy and Emma in his head.
Oh, hey, Toby. Are you as excited as Ricky? Ricky tells me that you and your new friends,
Jimmy and Emma.
that you all have become practically inseparable at school.
Jimmy?
Pretty soon, Toby and I will be running that place.
Yeah. We're the coolest.
You can even see that Toby's confused by his interpretation of things. It just makes it sadder because they're all clearly acquaintances, maybe a little bit better than that, not close friends, but to Rick, it seems like they've all become best friends. To his mother, she sees that he's made new friends, but in reality, they weren't that close. I mean, him and Toby seem to be actually friends, and maybe he could have been with Jimmy over time, but the way he lets this one kind gesture go to his head just shows how lonely he is. At school, Rick approaches Emma and thanks her for talking to him.
Thank you for talking to me, about Jimmy. When you speak, I listen. You're my guide.
Well, I'm glad things worked out. I need to make friends.
This scene is sad and also kind of embarrassing on Rick's part because he clearly thinks that there's some romantic relationship between them, or he thinks that Emma has romantic feelings for him, and it's very clear that she's just being nice to him, like any person from the outside would be able to interpret that. But because Rick is very socially inept, he confuses that as her showing interest, her very small kind gestures again being conflated with romantic interest. Things seem to be getting better for Rick when he and Jimmy are on more friendly terms. He ties Degrassi for the lightning round, and Jimmy seems to be genuinely impressed with him. Before the lightning round, Jimmy and Rick have a really nice conversation where we learn that Rick knows a lot of things because he reads so much, and that's because he has a lot of time on his hands.
So let me ask you a question. How did you become an encyclopedia?
I read a lot, and a lot of time to myself. I thought sports was your territory.
Yeah, I had a little brain cramp. And anyways, golf is not a sport.
You can see on Jimmy's face how bad he feels about bullying him up until this point. Rick's response is really sad because you can tell that he just passes the time reading because he doesn't have a social life. Because he's socially awkward and his interests don't really align with typical interests of teens around him, he probably feels even more isolated. You can tell that Rick feels acceptance to be able to prove his worth, even if it is using his smarts. He probably even thinks that if he wins the quiz show, it'll help him socially, which is just really sad. Jay and Spinner are making sure that Rick is going to be the one to do the lightning round. They also lie to him, making it seem like they're cool, but obviously we know where this is going. Rick wins the lightning round by 1 point, and just when things seem to be going very well for him, yellow paint and feathers fall from the ceiling, pouring all over him. You can see how Jay... You can see how genuine Jimmy's reaction is in the background when it happens too. That's how you know that he was genuinely caught off guard by the situation. But obviously, in hindsight, Rick never got that chance to be able to reflect on anything and realize that Jimmy was never in on the situation. Some people are clearly looking on in shock and horror while others just start laughing, and Rick stands on stage just in utter humiliation. Emma tries to comfort Rick afterwards, and he misconstrues this as her showing romantic feelings for him.
They ruined it, Emma. They're life ruiners. Everyone laughing.
But nobody's ever gonna forget who won. Who is the smartest guy in the school, in the whole city? Rick! What are you doing? Let go!
I thought you loved me.
I felt sorry for you. I pitied you. Get a clue.
You definitely see how socially inept that Rick is, that he thinks that this moment of comfort is Emma trying to confess her feelings or trying to comfort him in a more romantic sense. And it makes you just feel really bad for him on so many levels. I've met kids like that, and they just don't understand social situations and can't pick up on social cues. Rick goes home where he gets his father's gun from his safe and brings it to school. You can see how Toby defends Rick when JT starts making fun of him.
Cut before the paint pours on Rick.
Which is now officially my new favorite mental image.
You know what? I don't think it was so funny if it happened to you.
He really was Rick's real friend in the end. Rick is still covered in paint when he shows up at Degrassi. Toby tries to tell him to go home and that Raditch is looking for the ones responsible. Rick responds with this.
This is the one time I actually want to be at school.
It makes sense that Rick, who is already someone with control issues and violent tendencies, chose to bring a gun to school to inflict pain on others. In the cafeteria, Rick stands there while everyone else chuckles at him. People are just so cruel. Like, I would never laugh at someone that looked like this and already went through what they had. Paige walks up to Rick and says this.
I know we're not exactly best friends, but I wanted to say that I thought the whole paint and feathers job was sickening.
I'm sorry for hurting Terry.
You can see how Rick grips the gun and how he loosely lets go of that grip because of what she says to him. She was probably one of his first targets, but that apology is all that Rick really wanted to hear. You can tell that he just wanted to be validated at the end of the day, that he just wants a chance to be forgiven for what happened with Terry, which is why after Paige talks to him, he goes to the bathroom, where it seems like he's come to his senses at least a little bit until Spinner and Jay enter the bathroom. Jay notices the paint and feathers on the bathroom sink, and that's when Jay pins the whole thing on Jimmy, and Spinner goes along with it. Of course, they didn't know that he had a gun, but even still, to do that to his best friend is really fucked up on Spinner's part. Jay, I expect it because of his character at this point in the show and not having that close of a connection with Jimmy, but Spinner blames his friend and has to live with the consequences of that for the rest of his life. After this, Rick snaps and approaches Jimmy, feeling betrayed by the friend he thought he made. Jimmy asks how Rick is doing, but Rick doesn't believe him at this point and pulls the gun out.
Kind of surprised to see you here this afternoon.
Yeah, I bet you are.
Look, I'm really sorry about everything, okay? And if those guys give you any more problems, I got your back.
I set the whole thing up.
Rick, come on, I defended you.
Jimmy clearly looks scared as he sees Rick about to pull the trigger, and that's when he tries to outrun the bullet, but Rick shoots him in the back.
You made me do this.
As more students are running to safety, Emma, Sean, and Toby are left in the hallway with Rick.
Hi, Emma. Sorry I kissed you. Glad I found you, Emma. You made my list.
Rick, what are you doing?
You flirted with me. I thought you liked me, but that was something else.
Just put the gun down, okay? Anything else is just gonna make your life worse. We'll figure it all out, okay?
Just figure this out. It's too late. You already shot someone.
We see everyone meeting after what happened. Emma is clearly traumatized because she had a gun pointed at her.
Pointed the gun right at me. Honey.
Toby, who feels guilty for befriending Rick in the first place.
Toby, why do you think he did this?
I'm supposed to know? Like, the guy's a psycho.
Was he bullied or teased?
Every day. Just constant.
And what did your friend do when someone...
Look, he's not my friend. He's a psycho, and he's not my friend.
and Sean, who blames himself for how things turned out. After this, Toby has a hard time reconnecting with his friends because he was friends with Rick. Sean, who's seen as a hero by everyone, is clearly bothered by everything and doesn't see himself as a hero when someone else died. After his mother is interviewed for the news, this brings up old wounds for Sean, who had a strained relationship with his parents already because of his delinquent behavior. They probably gave up because they didn't know how to deal with their son's behavior, and they probably didn't have the knowledge or resources to deal with it properly. Sean eventually goes back to confront his parents. He's clearly angry because he knows on some level that his parents are worried for him, even if he's also angry at their choices and how they responded to his behavior in the past. Ellie tries to get Sean to talk, and he starts to open up a little before closing himself off again and distracting himself with more destructive behavior.
You want me to talk? Fine. When the gun went off, my hand was covered in warm liquid. I thought I pissed myself, but then I realized that I was drenched in Rick's blood.
The way we see how multiple people cope in different ways with the same event is what made the whole arc in Degrassi memorable for me. Toby, who knows he should be angry like everyone else. Toby understood personally and witnessed the bullying, so he has a different perspective to Rick's death than everyone else does, and this isolates him from everybody else. When he wants to go to Rick's funeral, he's afraid of facing Rick's mother, and JT isn't being supportive at all. After Manny talks some sense into him, he eventually goes to the funeral to support Toby. We see how Emma expresses herself more openly, crying as she hugs Sean, but he tries to shake everything off like it's no big deal. Sure, it's more dramatic for TV, but different people will have different responses to trauma, and that's what Degrassi understands about trauma, and I think it's depicted very well in that regard. Emma even eventually starts acting out sexually because of the trauma that she experienced. Sean is more avoidant to the whole situation until he can't pretend any longer. He eventually goes back to talk with his parents and allows himself to be more vulnerable about the whole situation.
He was gonna shoot my friend, so I grabbed the gun. I think I might have. Oh God! I might have killed him. I might have killed him. Died.
It's okay, kid. It's all right. You're home. We got you.
The weight of knowing that he might have been the one that pulled the trigger and killed Rick, Sean finally cries over what happened. And it's just really sad because you feel the guilt that this character feels. All he wanted to do was protect someone from getting hurt, and this is the result. He decides to stay with his parents so he can get through the situation easier. The result of the shooting leaves the show forever altered. Jimmy is left bound to a wheelchair. One of the main characters leaves for a season and a half, and Spinner gets phased out of the core friend group after they found out what happened. This season is still clearly one of the best that the show has produced. I think that it's still relatable and realistic on many levels, showing how severe bullying can drive someone to violent and irrational behaviors. We see how the school system neglected Rick's needs to be heard. We also see how the students at Degrassi were ultimately impacted by this event and the trauma that it left behind. After revisiting this, I think this is still the best Degrassi has ever depicted bullying in regards to a character that also had a violent history and someone that wasn't perfect, but I think was still sympathetic. This moment in Degrassi history is one of the most memorable and probably always will be. I respect Degrassi for depicting bullying in this way and showing what happens when bullying reaches a breaking point. Degrassi has done bullying after this, but I think that this event and the way that it built up everything, I just don't think that it was ever matched again. I mean, what do we expect? This was the show at its peak. Sure, there have been other jaw-dropping moments in the show, but this is the day that Degrassi stood still.